All right, as we move on to page 9 of your notes, we're going to be evaluating again some bigger arguments. Um, I apologize. There are times when a PDF prints out a little squirrely, and mine did whenever I uploaded this to my app here. So if yours printed out and you've got a bunch of like gibberish that you can't read, you're not alone. So my over markings there in black is what it should look like. Essentially, all I've done is I have recopied the tables from the previous 2 pages at the top of page 9 so that right there in front of you for easy reference, okay, rather than having to flip back and forth on different pages. As you work through this homework, it might not be a bad idea at all to like grab another sheet of paper or a note card or something and write those 5 tables out for yourself anyway, because you're going to be using them a lot, and it will be helpful to have them in front of you. All right, so that said, and again, apologies if things got printed weird. It's just what happens sometimes. Let's look at example 9. So we're going to create a truth table for the statement P or not Q. Right, so what we need to do whenever we do statements like this is we need to break these down into smaller parts. All right, so notice we always start with our P and our Q, our statements, and we start with the 4 different combinations of truth values. They could both be true. P could be true and Q could be false. Q could be false. Sorry, P could be false and Q could be true, or both of them could be false. So basically what we're doing is we're just taking the combinations that exist and writing them down. Okay, that's step 1. Then we're going to look for the next thing we need. So notice in this argument, I need a P and I've got a truth column for P. Okay, but I also notice that I need a not Q and I don't yet have a column for not Q. So that's the one I created right here, is a not Q. All right. Now, in order to talk about not Q, the only column you want to look at is Q, okay? Because we're talking about not Q, and Q is what will get you to not Q. So remember, a negation makes your truth value flip-flop, okay? So if Q is true, not Q is going to be false. If Q is false, not Q would be true. If Q is true, again, not Q would be false. And if Q is false, then not Q would be true. Okay, so we're just flipping the truth values around. Okay, now what I'm going to do is erase this one. Okay, we've already dealt with it. So if you want to leave a little mark, like this is how we got from there to there. Okay, so we've got the P part of the statement done. We've got the not Q part of the statement done. And so now notice the next part that we happen to be missing is, go to a different color here, is this part right here. It's the or part. Okay, so that's then where this final column came in, is now I wrote the bigger part. Now, notice to make this happen, we need to know about P and we need to know about not Q. Okay, we need to know about P and we need to know about not Q. So what I want you to do for right now, okay, and I'm going to scribble all over my notes. We don't need to know anything about column Q right now. Okay, I don't necessarily recommend that you completely scratch that out, but maybe grab like a pencil or something and like lay it there so you can't see that column. Grab a little tiny sticky note, I mean, whatever, just kind of cover it up. But for me, I'm going to scratch it out for right now. Okay, so we are looking at P or not Q. So here's my P column, okay, and here's my not Q column. Now, all that matters is that we're looking at the or, so we're looking at this table right here, okay? So when one is true, when P is true and Q is false, is the or statement true or false, okay? So if one is true and the other is false, is it right to say this or this is true? Yes, it is, okay? So the true false, again, that comes from up here. Notice if one is true and the other is false, the result is a true statement. Okay, going down to the next one. If both of those are true, okay, is it true to say this one or this one? Yes, it is. That's the first column up here on the disjunction table. Remember, it's okay to say both. Kate can have a cat and a dog, and it's true to say she has a cat or a dog. If both of those are false, is it okay to say this one or this one? Well, that's the bottom table, or the bottom row of the table here. If one is false and the other is false, the result is false. Okay, and then last but not least, if P is true, and then your next one, or false, sorry. If P is false and then your next one is true, is it okay to say this one or this one is true? Yes, it is. Okay. Golly, I wish I was in person to help explain this to you. All right. But again, you don't have to look at even the column headings. Really, all you need to do is match up these rows, the parts that I don't have scratched out. Okay. So again, I want you to pay attention to true and false led to a true, led to a true. Okay. True and true gives you a result of true. False and false, from your table up here, false and false leads you to a false. And then last but not least, a false and a true leads you to a true. Okay, that's ultimately what matters. All right, let's try the next one. I'm going to erase, though, some of all this garbledy-gook I've got up here, just in case we need it again. All right. So moving down to the next one, I'm going to make this a little smaller so I can hopefully keep my tables up there at the top in position. Okay, so create a truth table for what's going on here, okay? Not the negation of P implies not Q. All right, so again, we're going to kind of think about like order of operations. We're going to start inside the parentheses and we're going to work our way out. So inside the parentheses, we've got a Q or a P, sorry, we've got the P already, and that's all well and good. Here's our P, okay? The next thing we need is this not Q, okay? Not Q. So again, for right now, you're not looking at the P column at all. We're going to go from Q to not Q, which means all of these truth values switch. Okay, those all switch. That's all we do. Now I'm going to erase this mess I've got there. I'll leave this one here. Okay, so now we've got our not Q and we're done. Okay, sticking with the parentheses, the next symbol that we need to deal with is this if then. Okay, so notice now what we've got in this column right here is the whole thing in parentheses. Okay, we're dealing with that. So what do we need? What columns do we need from before to evaluate if P then not Q? Well, we need the P column and we need the not Q column. We don't need the Q at all, okay? If P, then not Q. So we need to use the P and the not Q columns. Now we're here at conditional, so I'm going back up here to the top. I'm circling what we got going on. This is the table we need to use to figure out what happens, okay? So down here, okay, we've got a true P and a false, not Q, but I'm going to call it a Q. Okay, so we've got a true and a false. Go up to your table that talks about conditionals. We've got a true, oops, highlighter. We've got a true and we've got a false. What does that lead us to? That leads us to a false. So this next column has to be a false. Okay, go to the next one down and what we're working on. We've got a true and a true. So what happens when we have a true and a true? It leads us to a true conclusion. So this is true. Next one down. We've got a false and we've got a false. What happens when we have a false and a false? It leads us to a true. And last but not least, what happens when we start with a false and a true? We end up with a true. And so we've got a true. Okay, and again, I didn't have to use anything. I just had to use those previous columns to figure out what was what. All right, so I'm going to get rid of some of my arrows and all my things here. Okay, now the very last thing that we are evaluating in this case, all right, the last thing we're evaluating in this case is now this not. Okay, well, what are we negating? We're negating all this stuff in parentheses. In other words, we are negating this column right here, because that column is about all of the stuff in parentheses. So that's the only column we care about right now, okay? We need to negate that column. Remember, a negation changes the truth value to the opposite truth value. So what was false would now be true. What was true would now be false. And you have 3 of those. And at that point, your truth table has been completely filled in.